Welcome to Alter. I'm your host, Nicole Meline. This podcast explores the practice of transformation, of growth, as a dance between hustle and flow, altering, changing, growing, becoming, and altering, offering, surrendering, opening to divine conspiracy. It's the dance of the leader, athlete, creator, entrepreneur, committed not just to optimal expression, but to exceptional being. So here are adventures in sweat and divine conspiracy. Awake to all the grit, dirt, and complexity of our world. Alert to the graces that come alongside the struggle, the hustle. Encouragement, an infusion of courage for the moments you need it most. I'm your host, Nicole Meline. Welcome to Alter. My friends, it is a joy to share this conversation with you, with my friend and neighbor here in New Mexico, and potent leader, Tracee Stanley. The last Alter episode explores how at this moment globally, generosity can feel like rebellion against fear and a sense of scarcity. It's how we root into the abundance and ongoing renewal of the universe. The practice of rest, maybe it's weird to call it a practice, but we'll explore in this conversation how it is similarly a rebellious act of faith in abundance and creativity. Our culture tends to celebrate hustle over flow, endless upward growth, endless production and expression, as opposed to the invisible downward growth of rooting into the ground, into the here, into the now, and the cyclical, seasonal nature of growth that we see mirrored in the natural world. I grew up hearing things like, work like it all depends on you and pray like it all depends on God. The subtle message of that hustle mindset is that your significance is tied to outwardly visible productivity and that the inner life can't be trusted. I love how Tracee shines a light on these issues and invites us into adventure in the wilderness within. You can hear in her voice how her practice of meditative rest, or yoga nidra, has transformed her. I call her radiance because she glows from within, and it transforms anyone lucky enough to interact with her. This is a perfect conversation to begin this month of December because this month in the Alter membership, we're exploring the theme of radiance through movement practices, meditations, and conversation in our mentorship session and community forum. I'd love to invite you to join at alter.nicolemeline.com. What does radiance feel like in your body? Breathe into that question for a moment. Kindle radiance. The holiday season is a celebration of light breaking through the darkest time of the year. What if this holiday season you focus on kindling the light within? That's what we'll be practicing together this month in the Alter Together membership. One more announcement before we dive into the interview. On December 29th, I'm leading the Envision workshop live online, and I'd love to invite you to join at nicolemeline.com/envision workshop. We're going to integrate this past year through a powerful year in review practice using the Integrate Journal and envision our next year, 2022, using the Envision Planner and some new tools I'll be sharing from my own 2022 planning strategies I'm in the midst of right now. It will be part strategy, part ceremony. If you can't be there live, when you join, you'll receive a link to the video replay to watch at any time. So again, that's nicolemeline.com/envision workshop. You could also just go to shop, the shop tab at nicolemeline.com, or the link is in the show notes. With that, let's dive into our radiance with Tracee Stanley. Welcome. When I was thinking about how to introduce you, Tracee, the only title that came to my mind is Her Radiance. We are with her radiance, Tracee
Uh,
Stanley.
I love that. May we all be radiant.
May we all be radiant. Yes. So we're here in celebration of your new offering, which
Mm,
is Radiant Rest, which is this, first of all, it's just a beautiful object. It's a new book, but it's beautifully designed and the artwork is gorgeous. That said, I have to highly recommend the audiobook
mm.
because as all of our listeners will soon get to experience, your voice, I'm just going to go for it. Your voice is itself a womb. Like
You're
it,
giving me all the good things this morning. This is great. Can we do
yeah.
this every day?
Please, please, I'd like you to lead me in Yoga Nidra every day. But that's also the great gift of the audiobook is to that you lead really the second half or more of the book is you leading through all different kinds of Yoga Nidra meditations.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the reasons that's so great is that you work with imagery a lot in your meditations. And some images are going to resonate for some folks and others for others, right? So it's really, there's a whole kind of variety of journeys that you invite people to. Um, and the book is, it's a, it's nicely, first of all, it's not very long,
Mm-hmm.
um, and it's very user friendly, and it really kind of works more, I feel like, as a manual and a little bit of history, which I
Mm-hmm.
want to get into a bit today. But the one thing it doesn't go so much into, which is I'm guessing intentional, and I'd love to hear today, is a bit of your own journey.
Mm.
You sprinkle a little bit in, but it's because the book, the book is this invitation, right, to all of our journeys. But I would love to hear, I feel like this is a great place to get started today, is your own journey into meditation and into Yoga Nidra in particular.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So first I will say that both the book and the audiobook come with audio practices that you can stream. So once you get the book, it's like I think page 102. And even if you have the audio book itself, make sure that you get the link so that you can listen to the practices in real time, like languishing for, 20 minutes, resting for 45 minutes on some of the practices that I read through in the audiobook. And I love that you are pointing out so beautifully that the book is short and accessible. um, I think that the reason why not a lot of my journey per se is in there is because I'm working on a memoir. That's one. And two is also because the way that I wanted to offer this book was in a way to help people to cultivate their own relationship with the practice of yoga nidra, which is really more than just the technique of yoga nidra, but the state of consciousness and the quality of the divine mother that takes her place in us as this place of repose and deep sleep and rest. And so I wanted to kind of peel back. Here are some of the things that I've done, but present them in a way that here's a few things that you can do. And that's why there's so many practices in the book, right? Because I've gotten people asking me, why do you have so many practices? It's so generous. And it's like, I want to be generous because I want to be able to give all the tools that I have for this particular portal to awakening. Why would I hold anything back? So, um, but my journey, so yeah, my journey kind of started over 25 years ago when I was sitting on a balcony in South Africa in a little town called Tamboerskloof in Cape Town, kind of looking at Table Mountain at sunrise. I had very little understanding, knowledge, interest in meditation, um, and wasn't thinking about meditation, but I was sitting there on this balcony watching the sunrise. And something happened where I just slipped into a moment of spontaneous meditation. into a state of meditation. It probably only lasted for a couple of seconds, but I was very aware that time and space seemed to change. And it really seemed as though there was this profound stillness, peace, and bliss that was inside of me that was being revealed in that moment. And so that kind of sent me on a little quest to figure out what happened, because I knew something happened to me, but I didn't know what it was. And I started to ask around, and I finally found somebody in the community who was a little bit older. And he said, "Oh, I know exactly what happened to you. Here's what we need to do." And he took me to a spiritual bookstore, and we basically collected 5 or 6, maybe 7 books. And I've always been an avid reader. So I read through all of these books, everything from being introduced to Khalil Gibran, Way of the Peaceful Warrior, for the first time, and so Celestine Prophecies. And so all of these ideas that were being presented in this book felt really familiar, but also mind-blowing at the same time. And then I had kind of a situation where all of my things got stolen while I was in South Africa, all of my belongings. And the only thing that was left was a book that I was reading, which was Long Walk to Freedom, which is Nelson Mandela's autobiography. And I had my ticket home, because this was back in the days when we we would pick up the ticket from the ticket counter, and my passport inside the book. And so I was able to have a shift in perspective that this was a sign and an opportunity and almost a transitional portal that was available for me to now make a different shift as to where I was going. Because at the time I was modeling, I had all these magazines and covers and tear sheets and blah, 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 and all that stuff got stolen. And so I just said, "Oh, this is kind of like when the gas station burns down in Way of the Peaceful Warrior. I'm out." And I
Wow.
just decided to stop modeling at that point and to really follow what was calling me, which at the time was an interest in documentary films, an interest in photography, an interest in being more creative and telling stories. And I made that transition when I came back to America. And at the same time, then knew that I needed to dedicate myself to figuring out what is meditation. And so I went on a little journey of, going to the Zen Center in Los Angeles and kind of doing I feel like I was doing like a taste test of every, kind of meditation practice, right? None of it was really resonating with me. And then somebody said, "Oh, you should do some yoga." And I walked into the yoga studio where I was living in Studio City at the time. And I told them I had not ever practiced yoga. And they said, "Okay, go left." And I went left, and I found myself in a Kundalini yoga class. And I remember that at the end of the class, the teacher played the gong. And I had never experienced any kind of sound healing whatsoever. But I remember feeling as though somebody had just opened up my heart center and poured in this molten gold.
Wow.
I can still feel it. I remember it like it was yesterday. It was literally like, wow. And then the woman who was sitting in front of me turned to me with this big smile after the class was over. And she said, "So did you feel it?" And I was like, wait a second. So this, whatever just happened, was intentional. This was like an alchemy of something that was put together so that we would feel a certain way after class was over. And I just started going to class 4 or 5 times a week. And eventually one day the teacher was sick, and I went to the right instead of to the left, and I walked into a hatha yoga class after about 4 years of practicing Kundalini yoga, and was like, "Wait a second, this isn't yoga. What are they doing?" They're like standing on their hands and they're doing these other breathing exercises, and there's no music. And I fell in love with hatha yoga. And at the same time, then I started practicing both.
Mm.
Um, and then to make a long story short, um, I discovered another teacher who was practicing and teaching vinyasa yoga and decided to go on a yoga retreat with him. And I thought, oh, well, I should probably pick up a yoga book to read a little bit more about yoga. I knew nothing. I went into the Bodhi tree in LA and they said, oh, here's this book. And it was a translation of the Yoga Sutras. And so
Wow.
I started reading this translation and really not understanding much of what I was reading, but there were a few things, including Sutra 136, that speaks about this light at the heart that is beyond all sorrow, that is eternal. And I thought, oh, wait a second. I'm not sure that the yoga that I'm practicing right now, or at least the teachers that I'm practicing with, are leading me to the understanding of what is in this translation. And I need to find that teacher, those teachings, that lineage, that tradition. And that is really what propelled me into what I consider to be a lifelong study of yoga and yogic philosophy and spirituality.
Thank you so much. And I'm excited. I'm excited to read the long story long in the memoir because there's so much to that. And I'm like listening with 2 ears because one part of me is I'm just kind of listening to how it's unfolding for you. And another part's kind of standing outside. And I'm loving how your story is an example of how there's, we set out on certain paths, we follow certain passions, open doors, whatever it is that led you to modeling, for example. And that was such a crucial moment when you had everything stolen to be, where the way I've kind of framed this podcast is to explore the dance between hustle and flow. And I feel like there's a dance there, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
there are certain moments where when you are on your path and I'm going to just throw out maybe like the publication of this book. I'm just going to guess that this maybe wasn't entirely without obstacles, challenges, etc. Maybe not. Maybe it was so, aligned. But there, when we're on a path that we know we're meant to be on, some kind of a creative path, vocational path of some kind, there's often obstacles, and there's a wisdom, there's a lifelong wisdom to cultivate of knowing when do we hustle, like when do we, blow up the rock and when do we flow around it and learn like, okay, the path is swerving, the path has changed. And there's I think what it kind of boils down to is this incredibly sharp attunement, right? Is this like that we are very attuned to the voice of the divine, however we understand that, the light of our own hearts. And these practices, which what I want to kind of explore with you today is a theme that I kept thinking of as I was listening through the book, which is that it's the inefficiency of these practices. And that, you talk about, you use this beautiful word, sadhana. It's a Vedic word, right?
Mm-hmm.
Indian, yeah. Which is just practice. It's the practice. And you talk at the end of the book about you encourage folks to just try a 40-day sadhana where you're committing to one particular yoga nidra journey over the course of 40 days. And what you're kind of suggesting there is that this is cumulative.
Mm-hmm.
It's not gonna You're not gonna necessarily feel the effects of this day 1, day 5, maybe even day 30, but there's this ancient wisdom that we know of the practice of the showing up. And we are going to face those moments where we get robbed, where the path swerves in a radical way, and it's
it's really only a lifelong practice. It's only that lifelong attunement to the inner voice that is going, that's going to lead us well and peacefully through that, right? And joyfully through that. To know, like, okay, this is the road. The road has changed. I'm being invited into something else, which there's great joy, waiting around that curve. But yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you for articulating that, because the attunement that I feel like we're receiving through practice is this attunement to discernment, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's the attunement to what we would say in yoga is buddhi, which is
Mm-hmm.
the intelligence of the soul, right? That once we start to attune ourselves, we can just remember that we can turn our face towards the light of our soul and that knowing, as opposed to bouncing in between the ego and our storehouse of memories, which keeps us making the same mistakes and the same choices over and over and over again out of habit, right? And when we do that, then I really feel like practices such as Yoga Nidra also attune us to the wisdom that is present in the transition. And there are always transitions through our day. There's a transition even within the energy of this conversation, right? And that we can, if we're really attuned to that, we can tune into, okay, what is the transition? What does the energy feel like now? Which way do I go? Even though you might have had a plan, right? Of what questions. It might be like, oh, I'm deeply listening to the transition of what's
Mm-hmm.
happening. And the next question is not what I had intellectualized, but the next question is coming from my heart. It's coming from my soul. Like, what needs to come up right now? And so I feel like we can do that same thing in our daily life, which is, kind of what happened. I didn't know this at the time, but it's kind of what happened when my things were stolen, is that the 6 weeks of reading all of those books had attuned me to a different way of understanding and seeing and listening. And instead of being in the kind of go, 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 where you just have this path that you're thinking, oh, this is the way I'm going. I know the direction. I'm not going to stop and ask or pause or consider or maybe change my mind. It's like, oh, something's happened. I need to pause. And, I think that it's really powerful for us because Yoga Nidra is really the practice of being able to be awake and aware through the transitions of waking, dreaming, deep sleep, and the portal to what's called the fourth state. And when we have that consistent practice of sadhana, which is a Sanskrit word that means committed, devoted, consistent practice over a length of time, but it also is a practice that leads you to your highest truth. So you embark on this practice because you know that there is going to be a friction. There's going to be a friction of doing it every day,
Mm.
right?
So
And
good.
I remember you sent me an email. We were talking about taking a hike together, and you said, "Oh, I do this hike every day up this peak," right? There has to be days where you're like, "Oh, I don't really feel like doing this," but you push through to do it.
Actually, most days.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And so there's a friction to having to make a commitment and then follow through with that commitment of doing something every day. And that friction is this heat that is sometimes
Hmm.
referred to as tapas,
Hmm.
right? It's this friction that means that we're kind of going against the grain, right? And when we go against the grain with a committed intention and purpose behind it, it allows for transformation. So we're not going to close our eyes with magical thinking and be transformed. I have never had that experience. I mean, I know that it can descend by grace, but I haven't been lucky enough for that. So there's this friction that happens, and this is the friction that makes us shine.
Mm.
It's said to be, and this is a quote from Eknath Easwaran, where he says, and I'm paraphrasing because I don't remember the exact quote, but it's basically that tapas becomes tejas, which is the radiant splendor of creativity and inspiration that melts all hearts. And
Wow.
it's a magnet for others who are longing to be free. It's a way towards freedom. So when we talk about sadhana, a lot of times there's this feeling that it needs to be this hard-edged discipline. And I want to make the case that I don't believe it has to be a hard-edged discipline. I think that if you can do something every day, whether it's 3 minutes, whether it's 10 minutes, or whether you're fortunate and privileged enough to have an hour and a half to be able to do something, that we can make those small commitments. And I can pretty much guarantee that if you do a practice for 40 days with intention, your life will be changed. You will be changed. There's no question about that. And you know, the yogis somehow knew this, right? This number 40. And yet now we have neuroscience that backs up this idea that it takes anywhere from 21 to 60 days to change the neural pathways in the brain, to change a habit. If you change enough habits, you start to change your personality. And your personality is actually just a construct.
Preach. Yes.
Yeah. So these practices are all, they're so needed for right now, you know, because I think in the stillness of what's happened and in the grief of what's happened, in the trauma and the outrage of all the things that have happened in the multiple pandemics that we find ourselves in, whether it is COVID, right, or racism, or what is happening to the earth, and the many more pandemics that we could name, right? We could keep going on about what's been happening. And there's a lot that's been revealed that makes us uncomfortable. And again, that's another transition. It's another form of tapas.
I love the way that you just put that, the many pandemics that we're in. And I'll have to look this up to source this, but I'm pretty sure that the word quarantine actually also comes from this root of 40, quarant. Yeah. That there's even, you know, this very ancient understanding that that is a number of retreat. You know, it's a number of restoration and I think, you know, to which we've all been invited, right? And the when I think about, there's at least three sources of power of the meditations that you invite us into your book. And I wanted to throw out too, as you were saying, when you were talking about practice, right? And even if we were to commit to a sadhana for 40 days, and that, you know, and that it's so refreshing for us to just hear any master practitioner say, oh, by the way, there is friction. Like, I still feel friction, right? And that's just to normalize that. Like, you're probably not going to feel like going on that hike, and you will never regret it. You probably are not going to feel like sitting down for that meditation, and you will never regret one that you engaged, right? In the book, you also, I think for maybe almost every practice, you say, you kind of say, and the 5-minute version of this would be, you know, like, if you don't have time for a full length practice, here's a smaller one that stuck out to me that I really loved. You talk about altars, which of course, you know, resonated big time. And you talk about just creating an altar in your home. We're all spending a lot more time, you know, at home, especially right now. And so what a beautiful, beautiful thing. We have a mutual friend, Elena Brower. And one of my favorite things about her is that she fills every corner of her home with
Mm-hmm.
these like teeny tiny little altars. And it might be a wildflower and a word that's
Yes.
she's sitting with that day. That could be her altar, right? Or a
Mm-hmm.
rock and something else. And so first of all, it can be that simple. An altar can be that simple. But you talk about creating one, and I love this. You talk about the image of like dusting it every day. You know, if there's
Mm.
and often altars will have some kind of image or some kind of element of the four elements, right? Earth, wind,
Mm.
fire, water. And so whatever, as you're tending to your altar, as you're just
Mm-hmm.
dusting your altar or refilling the little water dish or whatever it is, that itself is this daily practice of re-engaging with the intentions around creating it. And that itself is also cumulatively transformative.
100%. Thank you so much for saying that, because that in itself is a practice. That in itself is a sadhana. It's like, I'm going to tend to my altar. And when I'm tending to my altar, my outer altar, I'm also
Mm.
tending to my inner altar.
Oh, yeah.
I'm also tending, when I tend to all of those elements that you just mentioned, even the ones that are the most subtle, like ether, I am also tending to those elements within me. And then when I go out into the world, my relationship when I go into nature is different, because I have a reverence, I have a devotion, I have an honoring of those elements.
Wow.
And those are the things that help us to be able to heal and understand, let's say, the pandemic of climate crisis, that we begin to understand on a different level, because we begin to see, we begin to feel, we begin to understand it within our own selves. And that kind of wisdom is available through steady, consistent practice. And again, it doesn't have to be long.
Mm.
It just has to be devoted.
It doesn't have to be long. It just has to be devoted. Yeah, that apply to all. Yeah, that's so good. Um, One of the words that I was kind of surprised by that you use a lot is to be awake, to
Mm.
become awake. Let's put it that way. So yoga nidra, and I'd actually love. Here's a few questions I'd love for you to play with. That if you would say there's any distinction between meditation writ large and yoga nidra, I'd love
Mhm.
for you to maybe talk about that. And I had heard when I did my yoga training, I was first, I think I had heard yoga nidra introduced as the yoga of sleep.
Mhm.
And maybe a kind of wakeful sleep, but that wasn't really clear. I just remember the incredible Yogi Charu would lead
Mm.
us through yoga nidra
Was that
after.
in Pure Yoga? Was that Pure
Yes, at
Yoga?
Pure
Yeah.
in New York, yeah. And he
Uh-huh.
would lead us. He's such a special person. He would lead us through yoga nidra right after lunch, which worked perfectly, right? Because we just eaten and we don't want to move around on our mats for the fifth time that day. And so we'd be able to come in and and definitely half the room would take a nap, would fall asleep during it. But so I'd kind of heard of it that way as this kind of yoga of sleep, or even like an escort into sleep, right? Like a
Mm.
yogic
Mhm. Mhm.
kind of meditation towards sleep. But what you're really introducing it as a tool to become more awake. And
Yeah.
that's one thing I realized when I was listening, is that when I invite folks into meditation, when I'm trying to kind of make a case for meditation, I realized that I would say things. I've said things like, meditate to be more creative.
Mhm.
Meditate to, this will make you more, if you think you don't have time for this will make you more productive. And I
Mhm.
realized, and that there's a way in which that could be true. But I realized, whoa, that's how deep hustle culture, productivity culture
Mhm.
runs in me. is the only way I can justify profound, integrative, healing bliss is
Mm-hmm.
if it makes me more productive, is if it makes me like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. You're not the only one. So, you know, um, I think that it is a symptom just of our culture, um, in general, is that we look to extract, right?
Mm,
And we look to extract. It's like we're going to get something out of this. And there's a reason why the military is experimenting with yoga nidra practices,
mm,
right? It's an extractive culture that we're in. We take things to commodify them for our benefit.
mm,
And it's just like the relationships that we have with earth. It's like, I'm going to go take a hike, I'm going to go do this. It's always like, I'm going to go take, right? And so when
mm,
do we in nature do our hike or lay down on the earth or go to the beach or do whatever, and then before we leave say a prayer to the earth to give
mm.
back and just place our hand and say, thank you. Thank you
Wow.
so much for holding me. Thank you so much for supporting me, for being there.
Mm,
Unconditionally, by the way, unconditionally abundant and
mm,
giving and generous. And so I don't think that that um, is unique, but what a beautiful awakening, right? To hear ourselves, because I hear myself also, right? Is that to hear ourselves and how we offer something. Um, and so I think that that was one of the things that was for me important to cultivate this relationship with the practice, the state of consciousness, and the divine feminine within this practice, because it's usually talked about as a technique. It's usually talked about as yoga nidra is the yoga of sleep. It is, back in the day when yoga nidra first was getting popular, everyone would say, oh, yoga nidra is sleep with a slight trace of awareness, right? And so we hear things like divine sleep, conscious sleep, enlightened sleep that all let us know that there's a spark of awakeness there. And that awakeness means that there's a part of us that's always awake. And I believe that it's that same part of us that is eternal,
mm-hmm.
right? That's been there before you had a name, will be there when you no longer have a body. And when we touch in or taste that place, we're forever changed because we've had a taste of our true power. And so this wakefulness allows us to weave consciousness through all of the states. It allows us to let our body fall asleep, let our mind fall asleep, but consciousness stays awake and aware. And so if we practice that enough, what we're doing is we're definitely being awake and aware to the transitions in every moment. And when we come back to our waking life, we become more awake to our life, to the fullness of our life. And then we have those epiphanies where there's something unveiled within you that you're like, about to talk about your next meditation invitation. And you're like, whoa, wait a second.
Mm,
There's a mental construct playing on loop that I haven't been aware of. And now I have this awareness. That's another transition. And then you get to make your choice. Are you going left? Are you going right? Are you going straight ahead? Which way? And there's many more different directions than that. And so that's the kind of wakefulness that we're talking about. Because that same wakefulness of something that may seem, people who are listening may think, oh, that sounds really mundane. You had this awakening that this is the construct. But there could be another construct that someone wakes up to that has
Mm.
been leading them down a path of pain.
Hmm.
And when you wake up to that construct, then you have the choice to shift.
Yeah, you have really beautiful free writing exercises after many of the meditation practices. And I was so struck by some of the questions, especially this idea of kind of what's causing you pain right now. Some of them are really simple questions. But when you're considering them from this place of deep rest, and a phrase that you use a lot is to be held. Um, let's see, I wrote down a phrase. Let's see. So I think you defined meditation at one point as expanding your capacity to be held and supported. And it's this, as as opposed to, we were talking a second ago about hustle culture, productivity culture kind of being defined by what we are creating and extracting, right? um, this is this culture of surrender.
Mm.
And even my own, I felt just that word, I felt this dual response to a desire and a fear, right? Like this kind of dual, like, oh, I want more surrender in my life. And then a whole bunch of fears come up around that, a whole bunch of kind of protections come up around that. You really beautifully and wisely, you offer many more tools in this journey, but to engage kind of how trauma can play into our openness or closure to meditation, our fear of meditation, our fear of any kind of surrender. But a meditation practice is it's this wonderful practice of surrender, right? And we get to experience what our armor is. And I think we can see it clearly. And so to kind of circle back to the sort of epiphany that we can have in that time, like these powerful free writing moments where your your heart is unarmored.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, why wouldn't it, in the world that we live in, why wouldn't it take a good 10, 15, 20 minutes to become unarmored, right? To fully surrender and be held. Yeah, so beautiful and revolutionary and important.
Mm. Yeah, thank you. I mean, it's definitely um I love that you said unarmored. And also it's the mind has gotten out of the way
Mm-hmm.
while you're practicing, because if you were to answer those questions from like, hey, we're in this conversation right now and we're just going to, right after you're going to pop into the questions, it may be a different answer that's coming
Mm-hmm.
from a place of thinking and a place of shoulds and a place of shame. And there's such a purity that reveals itself, the pure light of awareness, of truth that reveals itself as we go through these practices, that you can really answer from a place of truth. And I'm glad that you brought up trauma, because I feel like it was really important for me to offer ways in which people can do this practice if they have suffered from trauma, because as you noted, there is fear that comes up with surrender. And that fear sometimes is a construct, and sometimes it's very real memory from this lifetime of a
Mm-hmm.
reason that you have to be fearful. And
Mm.
so, practice can be done with eyes open. Practice can be done sitting up against the wall facing the door. Practice can be done with a trusted pet or person protecting your space. We can create energetic circles of protection if that's something that resonates with you. Um, so there are many ways in which I would love for people to advocate for themselves and to also be creative in how they approach this practice. And I think that goes back to the cultivating the relationship, right? We each will have a unique relationship. And really this book is also about permission to find your own way
Mm.
and to let go of this kind of masculine structure that we have a lot of times, that it's done this way for this long and for this many days, And if you don't do it this way, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah, you ultimately invite people into a self-guided practice, which is so empowering. And it's, one of the things, it's funny when you started off your story of your own journey into meditation, into yoga nidra in particular, with this gong moment, the molten gold poured into your heart. And I also can remember the first time that I was in a gong bath, and I don't know that there's any other word for it, right? It's, you feel fully immersed. And it took me completely by surprise too. But there was an element of terror to it. There was an element of, I did feel like the sound, the energetics of the area was this connection to the eternal. And this is something I'd love to kind of go into with you. To put it really kind of, like, I guess, concisely, I think that my own resistance toward meditation and to rest in general, even to going to bed when I know I should go to bed, and this is what I found too in folks that I've worked with, it's a connection to our own death. It's a connection to our finiteness. The simple fact that we have to sleep every night, that we have to surrender to sleep, that we have to surrender to this reality that we are not of infinite energy. We have to eat, we have to feed ourselves, we have to sleep, we have to restore, we have to heal. And I don't want to admit that, right? And I don't know that I want to, when we stop in the middle of a day, and this was also kind of I found it really interesting that you were encouraging yoga nidra practice, say, in the middle of a day versus right before bed. And it's an honoring of the fact that I am infinite and I am finite. And we don't want to face the ways in which we're finite, right? But there's a phrase that I've been sitting with a lot, especially over all the many pandemics we're in, right? Which is befriending death. What would it mean to befriend death? And it's a, kind of a morbid idea that I don't know, we want to maybe run from, but there is a power. Like, I love that you call meditation a portal to power, this portal to the divine, this portal to our infinitude. But the doorway is our finitude. The doorway is like, I do have to sleep. I will die. So I wonder if you could riff.
Yeah, we can riff on death practices all
Can we
day
riff on
long.
death practices?
We can,
Okay.
yes, we can. The first thing that I would say is that I wonder, and this is a question for people to just ponder as they sit and listen to this, is that I wonder, are we more afraid of our infiniteness?
It's good.
Right? Because death is just another portal. It's just another transition. And so the partnering to the unknown is really the practice. Because when
partnering to the unknown.
Yeah, that's it. That's the practice. That, we can pretty much say, okay, we know what it feels like to be in the waking state. We're here, we're talking, we're listening. If you take a moment just to bring your awareness to your throat center, which is the center of dreaming, and feel into that space, maybe even visualize a full bright moon at the throat, and just recall the last dream that you had, the last time that you felt this sort of liminal, dreamy space. And then bring your awareness to your heart center, that place deep behind the sternum, and feel into the place of deep, deep sleep. And it's possible that you don't remember that place of deep, deep sleep, but you remember maybe emerging from the deepest sleep. So just remember the deepest, deepest sleep. And then feel that there's a place deeper, deeper inside your heart. Perhaps presence is even leading you to a cave, a dark passageway to a cave. And that passageway leads you to the void. And just notice what arises in your mind or in your body. And just imagining or feeling that you are moving towards the void. And then just take a moment to open your eyes to write down anything that comes forward. Because that void space, that place of non-doing, that place of what they call nirvikalpa, or no thought, is this place of the fourth state that can't be defined. It can't be described. And so that's the place we need to, that's the partnership. And, I have a teacher who likes to say that, and this is true, that yoga is the practice of dying gracefully.
Mm.
So we are preparing every time we practice yoga. We are preparing to die gracefully. If you think about just the structure, let's say, of a vinyasa class, right? You're starting in child's pose and you're ending in corpse pose.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
Right? There's transitions between all of those postures. There's transitions between all of the ways until we get to the apex posture, until we start to wind ourselves down to that final pose, final resting pose.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Final rest.
Final rest. And when we are practicing Yoga Nidra is the practice of dissolution. It is a Laya yoga practice. It is a practice of dissolution. It is the practice of pratyahara, which is the withdrawal of the senses, so that we can assimilate, reassimilate, and expand back into our true nature. So we have to withdraw everything in and turn everything off, the mind, the body, but keep that awareness flowing so that we can come back to the remembrance of who we really are. So yes, it is a death practice. It's about dying to everything that is not real, dying to name and form, and waking up to your power. And so the question really is, who would you be if you were your most powerful?
I'm just going to give that lots of space right here. Yeah. Wow.
And if that scares you, if that question scares you, really sit and journal about it. Why? Because those are the sorts of things that we start to peel away and we start to dissolve through yoga practice, not just the yoga asana, but really being able to practice things like self-inquiry, vichara, self-study, meditation, giving yourself space, being out in nature, all these things, practicing the yamas and the niyamas, all of those things together. That's why there's 8 limbs of yoga. Right? All of those things together start to wipe the windscreen clean so you can really see and reclaim who you really are, your birthright of being rested, of being powerful, of being clear, of being an agent of change in the world, of loving, giving, serving, and also being able to follow your own unique path, your own unique dharma, the reason why you incarnated as a soul on this earth right now. It's time for us to wake up to that.
It's time for us to wake up to that. Amen. What a powerful vision. And I think as I've heard you speak about rest, both in the book and more broadly, it feels revolutionary. It feels I think, I guess, in a very kind of culturally against the patriarchy, right? I love that you speak of yoga nidra as this practice of the divine feminine, this receptivity, right? This integrative practice. And when we, when I think about the kind of productivity culture that makes us feel like we don't have time to meditate, it's it at its root, it comes from this belief that we're not enough. We have to either produce, or, as I'm going to be thinking a lot more about after this conversation, all the ways we're extracting. We think about our kind of core identity as extracting, and both of those have the root belief that we're not enough. And I love that the answer of this practice is not only are you enough, you are infinite. So let's remember, let's literally knit ourselves back together with the consciousness of that, right? The consciousness of our eternal nature, our infinite nature.
100%.
Fully awake.
Yes, that's it. That's it. And then we can also be aware that every human being on this planet has that same birthright.
Yeah, just to sit with that today, the magnitude.
Yeah.
Well, I cannot thank you enough for this incredible invitation, all of these invitations that you're offering us. And my favorite of the meditative practices, and I wonder if, to close us out today, if you could do some kind of a riff on this, is the practice where you lead us into the altar of our own hearts and the flame on the altar of our own hearts. So that feels right for this conversation about altering and altering.
Yeah. If you're listening at home, you can kind of close your eyes and just feel into the space of the spiritual heart center, which is behind the sternum. And just feel as though you can receive your next inhale through that space at the center of the chest, and release your next exhale from that space. So there's nothing to do except to either feel, sense, or imagine that the heart center itself is breathing. And as you sense and feel the heart center itself breathing, you remember that there is this life force called prana, vital life force. And its vehicle is the breath. And it is riding on every breath in and every breath out. As you continue to feel this breath, perhaps you also begin to feel that the body begins to relax, the shoulders, the jaw, the temples, the eyes, the belly. And you just ask prana to lead you back to the altar of your own heart. And as prana leads you back to the altar of your heart, perhaps you see a physical altar and you notice the items that are on that altar. Maybe you notice a flame. And just feel and sense that there is a part of you that is sitting at the front of that altar. And as you sit there, just allow yourself to offer a prayer of honoring, of blessing for yourself. What is the prayer or the blessing or the honoring that you need most? And then take a moment to make a prayer and offer a prayer to the world, to all the humans in this world. And then one more prayer for the earth, honoring for the earth. And remember that this altar is always there, waiting for you to honor the flame, to honor yourself. And when you feel ready, you can come back. Or you can stay here as long as you want and spend some time free writing after.
Oh, Tracee, thank you so much. Where can we gather at the altar that you're creating? Where can we gather around your offerings?
Thank you so much. So obviously the book, radiantrest.com, you can go there and find out more about the book and get all the recordings for free when you purchase either the audiobook or the material book. You can also find me at tracee2easeyoga.com, where I hold space for the Empowered Life Circle, which is a place where we rest and we do Dharma talks, and I have special guests, and we do moon rituals and mentorships and all kinds of fun things. So those are the places where you can find me.
I love it. And I am very excited that now you are newly, like myself, to be found in Santa Fe.
I know, we're literally neighbors.
Yes. So exciting. So blessings on your work. Thank you for blessing all of us with it. What a joy.
Thank you for the invitation. It has been such an honor and a pleasure. So appreciate you.
Well, I hope that you are blissed out and expanded by that conversation. I know I am. I want to again recommend Tracee's book, Radiant Rest, especially in the audiobook form, which you can experience for free by trying Audible at audibletrial.com/alter, ALTER. It's my favorite audiobook platform. I also want to invite you to a new audio conversation platform called Wisdom, which is a new app I'm loving and going to be leading some open forum Q&As on. You can download the Wisdom app in the App Store, search on it for Nicole Meline, and watch my social media on Instagram at Nicole Meline or my Facebook page at Nicole Joy Meline for announcements about audio Q&As on the app. I've also linked to the Wisdom app in the show notes for this episode. I am joyfully answering the challenge we engaged last altar episode of Rebel Generosity this holiday with a few offerings that feel so fun to create. First, I'm offering a free trial of the Altar Together membership at altar.nicolemeline.com. This is it. This is the community where I am pouring my heart and soul into new, soulful, music-driven workouts that I imagine as sweat ceremonies and guided meditations and mentorship conversations. There are now over 100 on-demand videos for you to drop into at any time. This membership has evolved so beautifully this last year. Each month we work through a new theme that's threaded through all the new workouts and meditations and mentorship sessions. The theme for the month of December is radiance. Some upcoming monthly themes are vision, devotion, intimacy, generosity, and wilderness. The membership also includes an exclusive and rocking and rolling Facebook group where you can connect with your heart people. And it's truly my favorite place to be on the internet. It is inspiring and encouraging and energizing. So whenever you need to just dip into that community, it's there for you. So join us at alter.nicolemeline.com. And I am so excited to announce and invite you to the Envision Workshop. On December 29th at 6 o'clock Eastern Time, we're going to gather together online for a live-streamed ceremony to integrate this past year and envision 2022. Do this with your whole family or gather some friends for what could be the richest time of connection and depth that you've had in a long time. Let's dream together and let's create a plan. You can register at nicolemeline.com/shop, where you'll see the Envision Workshop and the option of purchasing an Envision Planner and Integrate Journal to have on hand for the workshop. And I just have to say, the Integrate Journal is the greatest stocking stuffer for any one of your beloveds. It's full of questions and frames that are going to walk you through this past year to identify those moments of wonder and gratitude, and also productive pain, growth, offering. A mantra and a practice that I come back to over and over again is alchemize the pain into wisdom. So how do we do that? We let pain, we let longing, we let shortcoming be our teacher into wisdom. But we have to take that time. We have to take that time to integrate all that we have experienced, to sit with it, to listen to it, to let it be our teacher. And similarly, when we hold, like really hold in our bodies, in our hearts, the incredible blessings that we've experienced over the course of a year, the moments of joy and of wonder that seeps into who we are and transforms us into joy. I've also created a gift guide of some other favorites for this holiday season on my blog at nicolemeline.com, and also linked here in the show notes, and a playlist of songs to root you into rebel generosity, including this gem, Sometimes I, by Rising Appalachia. And very importantly, as we begin a new season of this podcast, I want to invite you into the conversation. I'm going to do some Ask Me Anything episodes in response, not in answer, but in response to your questions. So please DM me in a voice memo on Instagram. I'm at Nicole Meline. So tap the message button on my profile and hold down the microphone icon in the message box and just record your question. I can't wait to hear it. And if you're resonating with this podcast, please share it. Text a link to a friend, take a screenshot, share it on social media, and please rate and leave a review for it on Apple Podcasts, where you can also follow the podcast so you don't miss an episode. I read each one of those reviews, as well as your messages and episode shares on social media. They mean the world, and here's the magic. They actually help all of us find our people we haven't met yet as we alter together.
I find beauty.